The NFL trade deadline ended last night, but your fantasy league trade deadline isn't for a couple more weeks. So we need to go make some trades right now. We have 4 buys, 4 sells for you before week 10. We're going to go running backs, wide receiver buys, then running back, wide receiver sells. So Ty, why don't you start us off with your running back buy?
It's Bucky Irving, Tampa Bay Buccaneers running back. At this point of the season, we can just look at the remaining schedule ahead and really use that as the biggest justification for these buys and sells. And Bucky has an awesome schedule the rest of the way. And the beauty is you may not even need to buy him right now. You've got about a 3-week window to go buy Bucky Irving at this point, because he has San Francisco this week, and then he gets a bye week in week 11. But coming out of the bye week, he gets the Giants, Panthers, Raiders, Chargers, Cowboys, and Panthers on week 17 of fantasy playoffs. And while Rachaad White has been nice lately, he's been making it happen through the air as of late. When Mike Evans comes back, that receiving role for, specifically Rachaad White, but also for Bucky too, because he was seeing an uptick in receiving work as well. But again, the receiving role for these running backs is going to regress a little bit. And so at that point, we know that this backfield is a hot hand backfield. And with Bucky Irving being the more efficient and better running back in this backfield throughout the year, I think there's some huge games along the way when you're getting the Panthers twice, you're getting the Giants and the Raiders as well in fantasy playoffs. So I think Bucky, again, you've got a nice window to go buy Bucky Irving right now. It doesn't have to happen this week, but at the same time, people may be panicking a little bit just because the guy only had 9 carries against Kansas City and now gets San Francisco.
Yeah, and I think one way you could sell him is you just show him snap percentages. Rachaad White is still out snapping Bucky Irving, but when you look at carries, when you look at yards, when you look at actual production, Bucky is out producing Rachaad White. Each of the last 2 weeks, he's had more carries than White. He's had more yards than White. He's had as many or more receptions than Rachaad White. The only difference, the reason Rachaad White's numbers looks better is he's found the end zone twice. And like you said, Ty, the way that this offense is going, it's hot hand. That's going to switch week to week. And we've seen enough from Bucky where, you know what, this last week kind of stunk, right? It was, what do we got? 6.4 point fantasy points. But we've seen that he's getting more and more involved. And then when you got that favorable schedule, they're going to score some touchdowns. So, I got to agree. I really like Bucky Irving in this, or moving forward.
Yeah, again, hot hand in this backfield. Bucky, 8th of all running backs in yards per touch at 5.6. He has the 8th most evaded tackles, 7th most breakaway runs, 4th highest yards created per touch. So again, you look at the efficiency metrics between these two running backs. Bucky is definitely the guy that Tampa probably will be leaning on the rest of the way with their schedule.
Yeah, and this was one I'll admit too. I was kind of going back and forth on between Bucky and Rachaad. I think they're both could be decent rest of season, but I think if I'm going to trust in one to just continue to take more and more of this backfield, it's Bucky Irving with the way he's looked on the field. My buy is a big name. It's Breece Hall. And over the last 2 weeks, it's been a little disappointing from fantasy. As a Breece Hall manager, I feel it. 9.9, 10.5. You're hoping for more with a guy you drafted in the first round. It's been frustrating to say the least, right? We saw 2 great weeks after Nathaniel Hackett was let go. We thought, hey, you know what? He's finally arrived. And then we see 2 down weeks. However, he's still seeing 17 touches a week through that. He's still second in running back targets and receiving yards among running backs. He's top 12 in attempts. Over the last 4 weeks, we've seen an 87, 82, 74, and 76% snap share. So he's still involved. He's still getting the ball. He's still running well. The issue is just he just didn't find the end zone. He didn't see quite the role in the backfield that you're just kind of hoping out of Breece or receiving work. That's what I'm looking for. But still 80, 74 rushing yards. That receiving work is going to stay, right? It's going to come back. It's going to kind of swing a little bit. It was really a Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams show last week. I think we're going to see Breece still involved in this receiving game. But the big kicker for me, why I'm really believing in Breece, third easiest schedule rest of season among running backs, and second easiest playoff schedule, getting Jacksonville, the Rams, and Buffalo. Breece is going to feast in the playoffs when you need him most down the stretch. This is the time where I would go, hey, he's been disappointing. Let me buy him as, the running back 12 currently, where I think he sneaks back up into that top 6-7 running backs.
Yeah, you kind of said it when Nathaniel Hackett was removed as the play caller and moved over to Todd Downing. It's been a lot better for Breece Hall. 6.3 yards per carry in week 6 against Buffalo, 5 yards per carry against New England, 4.9 against Houston this past week. Now you get Arizona and Indy. Again, the receiving work is going to stay consistent, right? You will get the spike weeks where he gets 6 or more targets in a game, but he's usually good for 3, 4, or 5 targets in a game, and he's going to bring in most of those. So again, with the amount of touches that he's getting in the run game, and again, the amount in the receiving game, people are still going to be down on Breece just because, again, they spent such a high draft pick on Breece. This is like the one time to go get a stud running back that can actually come through in these next couple of matchups. Talent is there, offense is there, matchup is there. Like when you go down the checklist, Breece Hall is kind of checking every box that you're looking for in a guy that you can bank on the rest of the season. So absolutely. I don't think anybody is going to disagree that Breece Hall should be a target right now if you're in need of a running back.
Yeah, and I think he feels almost like a bust, right? Running back 16 in fantasy points per game. But that doesn't mean he's still not good for fantasy football. It's relative to where you drafted him, right? You drafted him to be a top 3 back. He's not a top 3 back if he feels like a bust, but that does not mean he's been bad for fantasy. So I think we got to kind of get that mindset around as well. Before we get to our wide receivers real quick, didn't do this last week or yesterday really, but we're speaking to the 93% here. We're making sure that you guys know we're closing in on 2,000 subs. We want to get there by the end of this week. We want to see if we can push 3,000 by the end of the season. So we need you guys who are consistently watching our videos. Over 60% of you consistently watch our videos week after week to hit that subscribe button. It means a lot. And you join the fellowship. And that's really all that should matter in your life is being part of the fellowship because it's a very exclusive group. No, I'm just kidding. But we hope that you just turn that mouse a little bit and hit that subscribe button. I won't waste any more of your time. Let's get on to your wide receiver buy, Ty. Who do you got?
Yeah, Marvin Harrison Jr., Arizona Cardinals wide receiver. And I think this can be a bit of a hot take because I'm telling you to buy a guy that hasn't scored 5.6 fantasy points in 4 of his last 5 games. So what exactly are we buying in on with Marvin Harrison at this point? We're buying in on that this Arizona offense has been putting it together these last couple of weeks. And then he gets the schedule too, that when it comes down to it, right, fantasy playoffs and all those things, Marvin Harrison has some really nice matchups and can absolutely come through. He gets the Jets this week in a bye week. So similar to Bucky in the sense that you've got about a 2 to 3 week window that maybe you even let this week pass going up against the Jets. Marvin Harrison may, again, make that 5 of his last 6 games where he scores 5 points or less in a game. Then he gets a bye week, but then he goes Seattle, Minnesota, Seattle again, New England and Carolina, and then the Rams in week 18. The price is just going to be, I shouldn't say is going to be, the price is so low at this point because of the inconsistencies and the poor performances that why not take a chance, right? We talked about league winners again last episode. These rookie wide receivers up to speed, now understand the offense that they're in. There is an opportunity for these rookie wide receivers to kind of explode the second half of the season. Marvin Harrison can absolutely do that with his talent and his role in this Arizona offense.
For sure.
People,
go ahead. Go ahead. Completely cut you out there, Ty.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I'm just helping the people sell exactly on how to go buy Marvin Harrison.
I'll let you keep going. I'll let you keep going. I just jumped right in over top of you.
I just think people, again, are going to be so frustrated with Marvin Harrison that they may actually want to take on a Jacoby Myers or a Josh Downs at this point because they know what they're getting in those guys. And I just think Arizona, as a from a holistic standpoint, Arizona's offense is going to be better than Indy's, going to be better than Vegas's the rest of the year. Marv has the talent over those guys as well. Again, if you're one of these like top of the league teams, go take the shot on Marvin Harrison Jr. You have no reason not to.
For sure. I mean, I'm looking at the Fantasy Pros rest of season rankings, right? It's just a whole bunch of their rankers putting together who they got rest of the season. He's right around the Zay Flowers, Tank Dell, Darnell Mooney's only a couple spots behind him. You look a little further down, like I said, Josh Downs is there, Khalil Shakir. These are all guys that maybe you got to pay a little bit of plus, Khalil Shakir plus to go get Marv. But the upside of Marvin Harrison is just different than these guys. Obviously, we've seen the floor. But if they are able to come back and, really start to put it together down the stretch, especially after this bye in week 11, I think we could see a huge rest of the season from Marvin Harrison. And as we know, rookies tend to get better over the back half of the year. So you're betting on that. You're betting on just the way that, history of we've seen it and the talent of Marvin Harrison Jr.
It was just 2 weeks ago against Miami where you look at his next gen kind of route chart. And it seemed like Arizona finally said, like, oh, hey, wait a second. Like, we don't need to just send Marvin Harrison deep downfield. Like, we can use him kind of coming across the field and all those different kinds of things. Using him like a receiver. And what did he do? He posted 111 yards, found the end zone. It was the wide receiver 4 on the week. I think a lot of people will be like, well, what happened then this past week against Chicago? More of a systematic failure with Chicago than Arizona actually like asserting dominance, right? Mm-hmm. And in a game that ended 29-9, I mean, Marvin Harrison didn't need to step up like he did against Miami. So I'm kind of throwing the week 9 result out of the window, but people may look at 3.4 fantasy points and be like, well, what the heck, man? Like, what are we doing here? Right. So again, Marvin Harrison Jr., guy that was highly drafted in fantasy leagues this year, has the talent. People will debate all day long. You say that Brian Thomas Jr. has more talent and more upside and maybe the better wide receiver than Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm not talking about that right now. You know that he's got talent and it'll come through at some point.
Yeah, I mean, just to bounce off that, Kyler had 4.8 fantasy points last week. I mean, he had 13 completions for 154 yards. That right? That the offense as a whole just didn't need to do anything, and they just didn't do anything. So, yeah, I agree. I'd kind of throw that one out. Use that as a selling point of, hey, look at this stinker he's coming off of. I'm also going the rookie running back or wide receiver tree. Mine's not, mine's been a little better throughout the season than yours has, but Malik Nabers right now is second in the NFL in targets, and that's despite him missing 2 games with a concussion. Daniel Jones throws him the ball. Brian Dable calls up plays for him, and he is their entire offense. Last 2 weeks, he's had 8, 14, and 14. So nothing special, right? You're not like, oh, yeah, Malik Nabers was killing it. It was kind of like, hey, this is kind of disappointing from what we saw before the concussion. Maybe he's kind of taking a step back. Maybe teams have figured it out. But when you look at it, he's had 8, 13, and 11 targets, 4, 7, and 9 receptions. He just hasn't found the end zone, and his yards per reception have been lower. So that is really the biggest issue with Malik Nabers right now is just, the targets have been there. It's just the rest of it. His playoff schedules, Baltimore, Atlanta, Indianapolis. That's the second best among wide receivers. They're going to have to throw the ball a lot, and I think they will. But what you may see is he's taking a step back. For me, I see is right now, Malik Nabers has a floor of 14 fantasy points a game throughout the rest of this year because of the volume that he's going to get, because what we've seen from him. So I really like him as, he's got a great floor with obviously the ceiling we saw in weeks 2 through 4 when he exploded for 18, 12, and 15 targets and 3 touchdowns in that stretch.
It's 3 p.m. Central Time, so the trade deadline just closed, but there was one last trade that happened. You ready for this one?
Ooh. Oh, I'm ready.
The Texans traded backup defensive tackle Khalil Davis to the 49ers. Some depth for the 49ers.
Brutal. Really? You're going to give us a buzzer beater trade, and that's what you come up with? That's all we can
Hey, look. Blame Shefty. Blame Shefty.
I didn't say it's your fault. I'm blaming the NFL as a whole. That's brutal. That's brutal. Why
I
can't we
just love
have
how
like something nuts coming out?
I
Whatever.
love the tweet was backup defensive tackle. Like Rappaport admitted it. Like it's
Yeah.
a backup. Like
Well, and can we talk about the fact that like Jonathan Mingo got traded today, or I guess yesterday when you guys are listening to this, for more than D-Hop did? I mean, just ridiculous. Some of these more than Amari Cooper did. It's just brutal. What some of the, I don't understand the NFL trade market at all. But I guess at this point, it is what it is. Ty, what are your thoughts on Malik Nabers?
yeah, I mean, whenever an opportunity presents itself to go buy an absolute stud, you should absolutely go at least test the waters and go try to do it, right? Like no matter where you are in the league, first, last, middle of the pack, wherever, go throw an offer out for a guy like Malik Nabers, right? Some people, again, maybe looking too much at the past couple performances, and again, they've been solid. But some people may be like, well, we got 28 at the beginning of the season, so what's happening now? Like go play into that a little bit and make people kind of like second guess themselves when it comes to Nabers, that like, oh, maybe I really do need to let him go and maybe upgrade, when the upgrade is actually Nabers himself.
Yeah, I mean, I view Nabers as, borderline top 12 wide receiver for the rest of the season. So that's kind of where I have him. So that's the price, I'm willing to pay for Malik Nabers. And I think people are selling a little bit lower since it's been, 5 weeks at this point since we've seen a 20-point performance. All right, before we get to ourselves, we're going to hear from our friends over at Underdog Fantasy.
Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100.
We are back, and we are here with our 4 sells. Ty, why don't you give us your running back sell before week 10?
DeAndre Swift. Okay. And we've been talking about Swift quite a bit over the last couple of weeks because he's been coming through like crazy lately. And we've talked about how it's not a coincidence that he's been coming through against the really, really bad run defenses. So I'm just here to remind you at this point that the fun part of the schedule is just about over. He gets New England this week, but then you look at the rest of the year after New England, he gets Green Bay twice, he gets Minnesota twice, Detroit twice, San Francisco, and Seattle. It is not ideal. I believe you have to sell now because everyone knows what's ahead. And I would be surprised if you can get the full dollar in return for DeAndre Swift at this point, just because everyone, again, out of a bad performance by Chicago. I still don't think there's really any firm believers in Chicago when it comes to fantasy circles and fantasy leagues and stuff. But again, I feels there's going to be at least 1 or 2 teams in every league that is desperate for a running back. DeAndre Swift is the guy that you need to go sell to that league mate of yours, because again, what's ahead is not great for the guy, and you just need to maximize and capitalize on your return right now.
Yeah, we've kind of discussed, we've been teasing this part of the schedule. Obviously, still a decent game against New England, but that, like you said, Ty, that's part of the selling point. Since week 4, DeAndre Swift is the running back 3 in fantasy points per game. That's what you sell them on. You say, hey, look, he's matchup proof. He's been phenomenal. He's been doing really, and you go sell him plus for a guy like Breece Hall. That's what your move. That's what I would go move DeAndre Swift for. Obviously, we kind of think the bottom's going to fall out a little bit for him throughout the rest of the season. That's why we've been so kind of telling you guys, just put it out there week after week, like be ready to move him, because when he's facing Minnesota, Detroit, San Francisco, weeks 12 through 16, those are the only 3 teams he faces. That's going to be an extremely tough stretch, especially if Minnesota is able to look like they did on defense last night, because we've seen how good Detroit and San Francisco can be. So I definitely agree with you on DeAndre Swift. My guy is Kareem Hunt, and I'm going to be honest, he has a great rest of the season schedule. I think is the second best rest of the season schedule for all running backs. He's 8th in points per game over the last 4 weeks with 10, 18, 22, 13, and 18 since he took over. 21 plus carries each of the last 4 weeks. But my issue with Kareem Hunt is Isaiah Pacheco is targeting a return at the end of November. And I just don't want you guys to have another Jordan Mason on your hands where you are like, hey, the schedule still looks good. I'm going to hold him and try to flip him at the end of November. And then everyone realizes, oh, Pacheco's coming back. He really doesn't have the same, he's not worth the same as he was before. You got to sell him now so people are like, oh, I get a running back that's legit, that's solid, that has a couple more weeks ahead of him. So you can get the full value for Kareem Hunt instead of waiting, unless you absolutely need a running back. Obviously, then it's a little different. But I would sell him now so that you're not 3 weeks down the road and like, oh, he's splitting time with Isaiah Pacheco, because Hunt has not been efficient. He has not been, he's not going to be a guy that thrives on less carries. He needs all the carries and all the goal line carries to be good for fantasy, and that's why he's been good so far. So when Pacheco comes back, even if he's not 100%, I worry about Kareem Hunt's role in this offense.
Yeah, I mean, Kareem Hunt has not had over 4 yards of carry ever since taking over this backfield. Mm-hmm. And the reason why he's been so good in fantasy is because he's found the end zone in every matchup since being the lead back, and he's getting 20-plus carries. Okay, that can continue for maybe 3-4 weeks. But like you said, when Pacheco comes back, that's not going to happen, right? Like, now we would also agree that like Isaiah Pacheco is not going to take the entire backfield back right away. But we're then banking on insane efficiency. We're banking on 9 carries for like 80 yards or something, and that he finds the end zone. Like, he almost becomes like a Walmart David Montgomery that you really can't rely on, because again, there's going to be no receiving work. The small amount of touches that he's going to get, you really need to get lucky that Pacheco breaks off a 50-yard run to get it inside the 5, and then because he's gassed, Kareem Hunt goes in. That's just a mind game you cannot play in playoffs.
Definitely. And that's what I mean. Like, even if Kareem Hunt's still taking 55, 60% of snaps, if all of a sudden he's at 13 carries instead of 22, his fantasy, relevance just craters completely. Before we get to our wide receiver pass catchers, make sure you check out our Discord, because we've got over 4,500 people on there right now, and we're growing. We got tons of content over there for you all the time. Weekly rankings, start sit advice, waiver wire advice. So make sure you go check that out. That is in the link of the video or audio podcast description of the video or audio podcast that you are listening to. All right, Ty, take it away with your wide receiver, or I guess pass catcher sell in this case.
Yeah, I didn't go with a receiver here, because if you're looking to sell a receiver, it's pretty thin. There are not many wide receiver sells this week. So I looked to the tight end position, and I went with a bit of a hot take. I went with Cade Otton here, Bucky Irving's teammate. And Otton's been great. Great doesn't even describe it. He's been phenomenal the last 3 weeks. He's averaging nearly 23 fantasy points a game. Here's the thing. Mike Evans is going to be back after their week 11 bye. So you get maybe one more game, because they get San Francisco. I don't know exactly how, like, Cade Otton has kind of proved that like he can be matchup proof-ish without Mike Evans. So he can maybe come through for one more week, but then you've got the bye week, and then Mike Evans is back. And they're, again, with their schedule, Giants, Panthers, Raiders, Chargers, Cowboys, Panthers after the bye, I just don't think that they're going to need Cade Otton to step up as much as he has. So target your league mate that's been streaming tight ends all year, or target the desperate league mate that is like, man, I really need a good tight end. Like, I'm sick of banking on Mark Andrews every single week, or Dalton Kincaid, or whatever it is. Like, go target them and go ask for one of their better players in return. Again, capitalize on just the, I'll say this too, just to wrap it up. I don't think the good performances will be ending. Like, there may be times where he's going to give you 11 or 12 fantasy points, even when Mike Evans is back. I just think Cade Otton is just worth packaging and upgrading to bring in another stud guy. I think you can, with the right lineup, right league mate, if you can package up Cade Otton and get a Malik Nabers, get one of those guys in return. I don't know how it's going to look, but hey, capitalize on just the desperation of your league mates for the league mate that needs a tight end right now. That's essentially the point here.
Yeah, and he's has the third most fantasy points out of any non-quarterback over the last 3 weeks behind Saquon Barkley and Devon Achane. That's how good he's been. But this is the definition of sell high. He's been on a run, right? No more Chris Godwin. Could he continue to fill this void? It's making that call of going, this is as good as it's going to get. I'm going to get as much value as I possibly can for him and go in a different direction. And like you said, the tight end landscape has been so sparse. Cade Otton's averaging 12 points per game right now on the season. There are only 4 other tight ends averaging that. If you look at the wide receiver position, wide receivers averaging 12 fantasy points per game right now. They're over 36. So the 6th best tight end isn't even a wide receiver 3 right now. People are desperate for tight ends. I agree. I think you go capitalize on this and just understand 3 touchdowns in 3 games probably isn't going to keep up that pace with Mike Evans coming back. My player is Jordan Addison, and obviously we hate saying Vikings. That sells, Vikings, that sits. It always hurts our souls, but we have to be honest about him. This season, only 1 game with over 3 receptions. He's got the 9th hardest wide receiver schedule. On the season, he's got 2 games with touchdowns, and those are his only 2 games with double-digit fantasy points. So he pretty much is either you score a touchdown or your single-digit fantasy points. But the biggest kicker of all is TJ Hawkinson's coming back. Right? You might look at it and go, oh, yeah, he had 5 receptions this last game, and TJ Hawkinson was back. Hawk only played 42% of snaps. If you're looking at who's probably going to be the more used weapon in this offense, it's going to be Hawk over Addison. He's the third best pass catcher right now. And the way they've been using Aaron Jones, even Cam Akers coming out, I think he's going to be really fighting for touches in this offense. I would sell off this game and just move on for another guy that hopefully you can find a low-end wide receiver 2 for.
Yeah, we got gaslit by KOC pretty hard on TJ Hawkinson, but regardless, Addison is a tough one because I don't know exactly who's going to be willing to want to go buy a guy like Jordan Addison, right? Because of all the external factors and all those different kinds of things. But if you're able to, I think Addison, if you can go get, I use Josh Downs and Jacoby Myers to talk about Marvin Harrison. If you can get Addison if you can get one of those guys for Addison, exactly, maybe another piece as well, like that's a no-brainer in my mind.
Definitely. Like I'm looking at Ladd McConkey's another guy. If you could go, obviously he's been playing well, so he might be a little tougher. JSN would probably be tougher after this last week. But he was, kind of a guy in that area. Go package for like a Debo or something like that. A DJ Moore, who's been disappointing, or Rome Dunze, who we talked about last week. I just think there's plenty of guys who offer more upside than Jordan Addison will rest of the season that you can go buy for him. Well, that wraps up our 4 buys and 4 sells before week 10. Second to last episode in the books. Next week is our last trade targets episode. We'll have a different episode after. I don't even know what it is. I didn't check the schedule. So it's a surprise to all of us, and that's the way we like it to be. But we have starts and sits coming out tomorrow, so make sure you tune in for that. Lucas should hopefully be back. If he's not, we're going to go egg his house. So he should be back tomorrow. You can follow us on the socials. I'm at Camel FFF on the X, at Tyler _Tyler _Plath. We are FFLs on the X, the FFLs on Instagram, Fantasy Football Fellas on TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook, and Fantasy Football Fellas Shorts on YouTube if you want our short form content over there. But make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you tune in tomorrow, and we will see you tomorrow. Wow, I just really screwed up that ending. Deuces.
Deuces.